If you refuse to believe drug dealing is big business, here are over 18 million reasons to change your mind. In a ballroom at the Doral Country Club, agents armed with automatic weapons stood guard over an $18 million wall of cash, built with bricks of 10s and 20s. Part of more than $22 million right here in Miami, the biggest single cash seizure in U.S. Customs history. Over a year, federal, state, and local agents say they diverted the cash from a massive money laundering operation intended to turn drug profits from Colombia, Miami, and New York into spendable cash.
Police work in the 1980s and 90s in South Florida. What was it really like? Was it as is portrayed in blockbuster movies like Scarface or TV shows like Miami Vice? Well, today we have the honor and privilege of speaking with retired Coral Gables police detective turned novelist, Michael Hearns. Michael spent 26 years in law enforcement, 10 of which were as a member of the South Florida Money Laundering Task Force. I am Robert Asencio, and with me today on Bets and Badges, I have my co-host, retired police chief and military historian, David Magnusson. How are you, David?
Doing great. How about yourself, Robert?
Outstanding. Michael, welcome. Let's get into it.
Great to be here.
You had an incredible assignment. Why don't you talk about a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Coral Gables Police Department at the time was, and I'm assuming that still currently, were very progressive in their thoughts and what they were trying to do. And U.S. Customs Service came to us in the early 1990s, late 1980s, and wanted to see if we could join with them on a task force known as Operation Greenback. So the Gables assigned myself and 3 or 4 others over there. And as an anti-money laundering task force, we were able to do some really successful investigations and also make some very large cash seizures. And it just kind of progressed from there, and it became kind of like its own tornado of success, I guess, for a long time.
Tell us about some of the cases you worked on.
A lot of the things we did, you never really read about in the newspaper or saw. It was part of how we kept the operation going. If we started to, applaud and stand up and cheer and have a Miller time about it, it wasn't going to be really successful. One of the things that really sticks out was in 1990, my team and I, as well as the U.S. Customs Service, seized over $24 million of U.S. cash. At the time, it was the largest cash seizure in law enforcement history. And then, ironically, although we had multiple seizures after that, one that sticks out was we hit a house one time up in Northwest Dade in the Carroll City area, and we seized $6.8 million. And Nicholas Brady, the U.S. Treasurer at the time, happened to be in Miami. So they brought him out to the scene, and he was standing there looking at all the cash we had just seized. And I was standing next to him, and I remember telling him, your signature is on some of these bills. So it was kind of ironic to have him stand next to us while we had seized all that money.
I think Michael was the Miami Vice guy, and I might have been something from NYPD Blue guy, just getting out there right on, doing the same work, but not so much covertly. I mean, we've done street level narcotics and things like that. We did the drug units and stuff. His stuff was heavy stuff. Ours was setting up, and basically I was setting up my career in the north end of town. I would come south of the river to help out the other areas that needed help in their investigations, like when they were hitting and stealing from the ports, when the freighters came in from Haiti, and you had the Haitian gangs and stuff. And so we did a lot of working with that. But I'll tell you, it was all a collaborative effort. What we did was very important to them, and what they did was incredibly important to us. And even though you would say, well, I don't see how these intermingle, they certainly did. There was always some connectivity. And it's like putting a puzzle together. I mean, they knew where Michael and his group knew where to put those puzzle pieces, and we knew where to catch a lot of these people that were maybe transporting it or getting the weapons or stirring up, heck in a handbasket up in the north end of town. And
yeah, well, let's frame it up for the audience, right? So what years are we talking about here, guys?
Well, for me, actually, I came in at the back end of the TV show Miami Vice. I came in 1989, but I'll take the compliment from David, but I also need to also let your audience know that one of the things David's not telling you or hasn't mentioned to you is that there are many times that David and his team went out with a specific targeted area, specifically targeted crime, a specific targeted crime individual, and all of a sudden, all kinds of commotion and chaos broke around them that they weren't expecting. And his team and his leadership had to really be very reactive. Sometimes in these long drawn out money laundering, cocaine trafficking cases, it's kind of proactive. You're kind of guiding the case along. But in David's case, there was a lot of times that he had to act quickly. And so I have a lot of respect and admiration for him and his team and the stuff that they did, because we ran in similar circles. It's almost like a Venn diagram, and when you start to look at the overlap between what David was doing in his time and what we were doing in our time, there's a tremendous amount of overlap, a tremendous amount of personnel that rotated from my group into his group and vice versa. So, I think he's kind of downplaying the importance of what he did. They did some really good stuff out there, and his team and his guys, to me, and from my remembrances, are quite legendary.
Yeah, so we're talking about 89, late 80s, mid to late 80s into the 90s.
Yeah,
right?
I did it from 89 to 99. I did it for 10 straight years.
So let's talk about Miami, right? South Florida.
Oh, yeah. And New York and Los Angeles and other cities as well. I mean, we did a lot of cases and deals outside of South Florida too. We did the Tri-County area, Palm Beach, Fort Broward, Miami-Dade, primarily Miami-Dade. I did some stuff in Monroe as well, but we also worked in New York City. We worked in Los Angeles. We did a lot of stuff. It was an interesting time. It was a different time. Mm-hmm. But in following up on what you were going to say, being in the epicenter of it all is Miami-Dade County. And a lot of people forget that Miami-Dade County, by geography and by population, is bigger than the state of Rhode Island.
You know what always freaked me out about Coral Gables? Was the street names, right? It's a city that doesn't have street numbers. It's pretty much designated by names. So you get involved in a police chase coming from other parts of the county, which the streets were numbered, and you get into the Coral Gables area, and I was hoping that we'd have a Coral Gables with us, because we didn't know where the hell we were at. We knew we were one block or a couple blocks off a main road, like Lejeune Road or Douglas, which you mentioned earlier.
The signs are on the ground.
Yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah, all it takes is one parked car or high grass and you won't see the sign. I can remember in the early days before we had interoperability type radios, and we would have City Miami primarily come over our inner city radio, and you'd hear a guy, I'm chasing the bus. I just passed a fountain. I don't know where I am. And it was always like, I just went past a large building. And you're like, we'll try to help the guy if we can find him.
Yeah, David, and the city of Miami abuts Coral Gables, right?
Thankfully, in the north end and in the central part, it was normal. Street signs and avenues. The occasional time that we had to go down to the Grove, we felt the pain a little bit until you were there enough. Then you say, okay, I know where I am now. But from the start, no, I say, the heck are these names? I mean, bring me back up to 15th Avenue and 68th Street. I know where I am then.
When I was a rookie officer, I used to carry a hand-drawn map that had Xeroxed of the Grove in my shock plate of my vest, because the Grove was my sector when I first came out of police academy. So I was up with Miami all the time in there, and everything. I had a little map that if I ever had a foot chase or something in the middle of the night or a perimeter, I could pull it out and know where I was.
I wish I would have had one of those maps, because I got lost plenty in the Coral Gables. But what I was going to say about what was interesting about those times is that I remember going out on the street on patrol, whether it was day patrol, night patrol, or midnight shift, right? And it wasn't more than a couple of days that would go by that there wasn't some type of calamity happening with police chase, shots fired. And what was amazing to me is that whether I was in the Coral Gables or whether we were in Coral Gables or in the city of Miami or in other parts of the county, when you call for what's called a 315 emergency backup, the world came to us, right? And you'd see our brothers and sisters from Coral Gables. You see our brothers and sisters from the city of Miami, Miami-Dade County, North Miami. I mean, all over the county. It was really a time that I think law enforcement was really attuned to really the street and helping officers. And I tell you, not to make it about me, but I'm getting chills thinking about it. If it hadn't been for those backups, those 15s, I don't know if I'd even be alive today.
The 315s, I mean, being out on the street, it was a time. I think it was, and I think every generation says this, I suppose, but it was a great time to be a cop. There was a lot of things going on, and that's not to downplay the great work that the men and women do today, but there was just so much going on, and even shifting out of narcotics into my forte. More my forte would be robbery, and then the tourist robberies that went on when there were thousands, and it was screwing up the economy of Florida. And I'll never forget sitting in a large office. There were FDLE people there, higher rank, listening, and they had the squawk box, with it was the governor. It was Governor Childs, and it wasn't my conversation to be in on. They were talking, but we were all in the office. But I could hear clearly in his southern drawl, "Make it stop. I want you to make it stop." And I never forgot that. We made it stop. I mean, it stopped. And I know they went federal on these bad guys that were targeting tourists. But I mean, that was like in the 93, 94, 95. It all ran together, sort of. I think Miami Vice was off the air at that time. But there was just something always going on in South Florida, crime-wise. And yes, the dope was always prevalent, right? But there was this violence too towards people just coming down there. I was on the scene with on the two separate German tourist robberies where one woman got run over by the car side of the highway there in front of her kids when they tried carjacking her and robbing her. And then a gentleman named Uwe Rackebrand was shot by some chick called Gangsta Bitch on the highway as they were driving south on I-95. And again, it goes to where everybody in law enforcement got together, especially on Hearst, to find where she was hiding out and to bring her to justice for killing another tourist. And we were in the headlines for all the wrong reasons, but it was the law enforcement officers in uniform, undercover, the ones you wouldn't even know are cops from all these jurisdictions that somehow along the way worked together. They got together in a meeting, brought together somehow. And God rest his soul, the former governor, we made it stop.
Coming out of the 1980s, which we look across the skyline of South Florida, Miami, right? A lot of those buildings were built with the illicit or illegal money that was circulating in the county. And then your task force comes about and starts targeting those people that were working and trafficking in ill-gotten goods and cash, right? And you were going after the money. I mean, what a better way to paralyze a criminal enterprise than hit them where the pocket is?
I think one of the igniters for everything that we've just discussed in the last couple of minutes was the Time magazine article that titled "South Florida's Paradise Lost." That caused a lot of city managers, mayors, the governor, other people to realize we need to get in front of this instead of getting behind this. So a lot more creative minds came into the law enforcement circle. In my case alone, I came out of the police academy, and like I said earlier, Coconut Grove was my section. And we had a crack den area in our side of Coconut Grove, in the Gables side. And back then, it's all built up now, but back then, these residences, these duplexes were freestanding with a lot of open space around them. So anytime law enforcement tried to make an approach towards them, they would see law enforcement coming, they would run, they would hide, they would get rid of the crack cocaine, they would do whatever they could to avoid detection and arrest. And right out of the academy, I just drove in there in a marked unit and read the Miami Herald. I didn't ask for ID, I didn't check ID, I didn't chase anybody, but what I did, I kept the buyer out of the equation. And the crack cocaine is no good if you can't sell it. And eventually, from 3 to 11 p.m., nobody was making any sales, and they moved on. And so taking that same premise at that micro level and taking it to a macro level with the money laundering situation, people think about drug traffickers having tremendous amounts of cash and proceeds and currency from their activities. And that's true. And they oftentimes think of it as what we say in Spanish, a caleta, which is basically like a big stash. But also that money is oftentimes used to influence political elections in other countries, destabilize economies in other countries, flood markets with cheaper goods that they can buy on the market with their money and stuff. So the money laundering is actually a larger economic question than just crime. So what the Gables did, and then later on in years to come, we had the city of Miami join us, and Miami-Dade joined us, and Miami Shores and a couple other agencies came on board. But in the beginning, it was just Coral Gables and U.S. Customs. We went after the currency. And the premise is basically very simple. Cocaine grows on trees, i.e. bushes, to be honest with you. And if you seize kilograms of cocaine, all the drug trafficker has to do is go back with his team, harvest more leaves, create more kilograms of cocaine. But unfortunately for the three of us and everybody else listening, money does not grow on trees. So when you seize the currency, you negate everything. You negate the cultivation of the coca, the transportation, the bribery, the corruption, the importation of it, the storage of it, the sale of it, and then the repatriation of the currency going back to South America. So when you intercept that currency, you negate everything. And that's where it really hurts the most.
So when you guys seize these people's money, lives were lost too.
It's not something that I want to put on a flag and hang in front of my house, but there are many individuals who, upon having currency seized from them, were told, "Listen, you have a choice. You can go back and try to explain what happened, or you can come work for us." If they didn't want to come work for us, then they were out on their own, and there are quite a few of them who met an untimely demise because they lost the currency.
Let's talk a little bit about how you guys worked subjects back in the day. What you just said about flipping them and having CIs working for y'all.
Well, I think, and to dovetail what David was talking about with the German tourist situation and some of the other more noteworthy situations in South Florida, these street officers, some of them in uniform, but primarily a lot of these plainclothes street officers from different agencies, they had a wealth of information and a wealth of informants that they oftentimes didn't bring out until they had to.
You didn't need documented CIs. You had sources out there. And listen, sometimes you did them the favor. And if they had any semblance of paying it back, you can count on them. They see everything out there. They know what was going on. And this is even back before the cell phones, man. We had beepers, and we didn't have cell phones. You had to pull up. But what you did do is you walk by a house and you can hear somebody talking from behind a curtain. You can't see them. Say, "Meet me." I'm making this up now. "Meet me at the Circle K 7 and 6-9 at 11 o'clock p.m." And that's where you would go. And then it was safe for the person to say what they were going to say. Sometimes it would be on a piece of paper, and they say, "You can call me at this number at another time." But you didn't have the ease of using a cell phone. You didn't want to go back to the office. Yeah, you used a payphone. There were payphones. You could do that too. But you look back now to then from what's going on now, and you really stop to think about it. Yeah, that's right. I didn't have a phone then. Yeah, how did I do it? But you did it. How did they get a hold of me? But they did. And sometimes you would get something over the air. With a fictitious name, they want to meet you with information over at a certain thing, and it would come through the complaint room. There was just a variety of things that don't happen anymore because there's no need for it to happen because of the ease of cell phones. And then, of course, you had the burner phones and all that other stuff that went on. But the information was given, and it was, like as Michael said, there's a vast array of knowledge out there on the streets. People see everything. They're the best sociologists in the world. They see everything. They know what's going on. And they also build a rapport on which cops they know is going to get the job done.
There was a whole part of law enforcement that many of us, when we were in uniform, and then you go to investigations or detective work, you saw a different part of it, but still we did not see the entirety of the picture, right? And as Michael, you had mentioned this in a pre-conversation we had, that Miami's crime in Miami, the vibe, if you will, is glamorized, right? But there was a part of that was actually part of South Florida that was glamour, right? So what was your experience with some of those big players that were driving the fancy vehicles and living in the big houses and, spending lavishly and had all the bells and whistles of technology that was available at that time?
Yeah, it just made life easier, to believe it or not, because it made them stand out more. The ostentation aspect of what they were doing, how they were living their life, just made things a lot easier to find out who's who and what's what. I think what David was also touching upon is that we were working without the technology that's available to officers now, but also it was still a level playing field. The bad guys didn't have that technology either.
Mhm.
And it's incumbent upon law enforcement in today's world to stay abreast of technology and to learn how to embrace it and how to harness it and how to effectively use it to their advantage. But as David said earlier, we were doing it without all these things. Like in today's situation, or as I should say, as I was rotating out and leaving the department in retirement, we all had the CMT computers, we had the CAD system, and you could look at the screen in your car and see where everybody was. But back in our time, you had to keep your ear tuned and know when so-and-so made a last radio transmission, when so-and-so said they were checked out with somebody at a street corner. Hey, it's been 6 minutes. We haven't heard from him. We need to go by and check on him. You, in your head, were running 15, 25 people through your head, knowing where they were at all times. So your pencil was sharper. If you don't use your brain a lot, you'll get barnacles on it. Then you start to get slower. We had to be a lot sharper because we didn't have some of the easements that are coming to the officers now. That's not a disrespectful comment about anybody in law enforcement now. It just means that they have at their fingertips quicker access to information and location and geography and chronology than we did. So, yeah. And as far as like the ostentatiousness and the heavy rollers, well, we all know about them because they all got caught. That's how we know about them. It's the men and women who were in that business who stayed under the wire and they kept it to themselves and kept quiet about it that you never heard about.
Was that more the norm?
I know players on both sides of that playing card, and they're now as old as I am, if not older, and some of them are living grand lives of never having to worry about the scarcity of anything, and others are in jail. I mean, if you were going to be flashy, you were going to attract attention. That's what the word flash means. It causes, people to see, that causes things to be seen. But if you stayed under the wire, which some people did do, then you were off the radar for law enforcement as long as someone didn't throw you under the bus.
What year did you retire from police work?
I retired in 2015.
Okay, same year I did. So I guess we have the same time on because I came on in '89 and
I came on in '89.
It's interesting. You go back to the primary source here. We talk about the river cops, but the position that the city of Miami put themselves in by being so shorthanded in law enforcement, when things started to go to heck in a handbasket, Mariel Boatlift, the riots and everything, they had to massive hire. They, they didn't keep up with the times. And because of that, they sort of, I wouldn't say they turned a blind eye, but the scrutiny certainly wasn't there as it should have been with hiring. And, when out of desperation, you start bringing everybody on board, this is what's going to happen.
It's an issue of standards. If you lower your standards, well, especially in a high liability industry like police work, buyer beware, right?
Listen, I've always said there's nothing worse than a bad cop, and there's nothing better than a good one.
Yeah, I had very little tolerance. I mean, that's my disclaimer. I worked hard to become a police officer. I worked hard to serve the military. I took that oath really, really, really serious. And I wasn't an angel, but when you put on that badge and you swear to protect and serve and protect or serve by the Constitution, there's no room for freaking dirty cops. So that's just my little pointer. Anyway, so let's talk about Michael's retirement, right? You go into you start writing you write novels, and you're now have an incredible following. And I have one of your novels up on the screen here, Trust No One. Tell us how you got into writing novels and this fictitious character that merges with reality in real life South Florida. Tell us about that, man. That's pretty cool.
My first novel, which is titled Trust No One, that you mentioned, Robert, that was the launch of fictional detective Cade Taylor from South Florida, who finds himself in a vice narcotic unit, and he is vexed with some serious criminal activity he has to deal with in South Florida, primarily Miami. And what I did was I created Kay Taylor as a fictional character, but everything he does, everywhere he goes, every street he's on, every restaurant he walks into, every building are real locations in Miami. In fact, certain people who are fairly noteworthy in Miami make appearances in these books as well. So he, as a fictional character, is truthfully interacting with a realistic Miami. And that novel I thought would be one and done, but there was such a hue and cry for Kay Taylor that I said, well, if I can write another compelling story and it's entertaining and people want it, I'll try it. And second novel was called Grasp and Smoke, which led to the third novel, One More Move, and now I'm up to my fourth novel, which is Choices and Chances. So it's been 4 novels of Kay Taylor in Miami, working with Miami PD, working with Coral Gables, working with Miami-Dade, all in there. Yeah, which is similar to what we went through as we did these cocaine trafficking cases and money laundering cases. Many of our brethren did not fully understand what it was we were doing. And so the readers are able to see the lifestyle that the three of us had to endure in many forms, in many ways. And I bring what the three of us went through this character to the readers.
And I suspect that the attraction is not just, that this individual probably is like many people who are reading it, the book, right? But also, or the series. Also, the attraction has to do with South Florida, the fact that you're site-specific.
Miami is as big a character as any person is in this book.
Just skipping ahead a second, you have some sort of a relationship there with Tom Petty, huh?
Yeah, that was not a plan. That was pure happenstance. A friend of mine had a house in Malibu, and he wasn't there that much. He's there like 10 days a year, and he threw me the keys and said, "Why don't you hang out in Malibu for a while and have some fun?" So I ended up living in the house for a while and realizing that Tom Petty was my next door neighbor, and then one house over was Mike Eisinger from Incubus. But having Tom as a next door neighbor, I got to know him. I got to know his wife Dana, nice people, and I would hear him at least 3 times a week, maybe 3 to 5 times a week, rehearsing from his in-home studio. He would open up his doors, and the music would kind of just waft over the hedge line of the lawn and stuff. And I was not one of those people who's going to go out there and shake their fist at the clouds and bemoan the fact that Tom Petty's playing live for me and me only. I recognized that this was a gift, and I was going to take advantage of as much as I could. So each and every time I heard him, I just like stopped whatever I was doing, and I was like, okay, let me just take this in, because this is not going to last forever. And we do know now it did not last forever.
It's good to be king, huh?
It's good to be king. It's good to be king. And like I said, one of the things that we talked about earlier was like David mentioned that, you could go to a department and certain men and women were the ones to go to. And I remember, well, I'm not going to drop a bunch of names, but I knew who to go to from each agency, who was a stand-up person. And David was one of the guys that we always thought knew has thumb on the tempo of the north side of Miami-Dade County and the city of Miami.
Listen, it's been an honor, certainly an honor.
On that note, it's always a pleasure to speak with people who have honorably served our country, our nation, our people. People who put their lives on the lines. Today, we were honored with interviewing and speaking with Michael Hearns, the writer, novelist of the Trust No One novel, but also the Kay Taylor character, fictional character based in a real South Florida setting. I urge everyone to take a look, buy his book, read it, and learn a little bit about the South Florida lifestyle of a fictional character. This has been another show. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next time.